Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in to College Football Across the Nation, brought to you by Spreaker.com in association with National Sports Radio. Thank you all for coming back for episode 2 of College Football Across the Nation. I am your host, as always, Phil Nunziata, and I come with you today as part of the studio for my new co-host. His name is Ryan Mock. He was actually on my original show back a couple years ago on 1,000 Mics. We used to run a show called The Sports Corner, and I'm glad to have him back because he was always the college football genius, and I thought it was good to bring him in for this. So Ryan, go ahead and say hi to the people.
Hi guys, I'm excited for another year of college football. This is always my favorite time of year, late August, before the weather starting to turn a little bit. Boys getting ready to go, spring practice wrapping it up, and I'm ready to go.
Well, the season definitely can't get here quick enough. I mean, the games officially kick off tomorrow, headlined, for me at least, by UCF versus Akron, because it's a game that I'll be attending. Very excited to actually be there to watch the season kick off. But as of right now, we only have preseason rankings to go off of, because it's really the only topic of conversation before the games kick off. And there's always teams that you feel are overrated and underrated. And Ryan, I know you have a few of those set up. What do you have? Who's too high and who's too low, in your opinion?
Well, overrated, I got Ohio State. I mean, great. Yeah, they had a great year last year under Urban Meyer, their first year with him. But they got to prove more to be number 2. I mean, I think they'll be good, but you're telling me they can compete with Alabama, Oregon? I just don't see it yet. And underrated, I think the Miami Hurricanes. They're not even rated at all. So they have an explosive offense. Stephen Morris needs to be talked about more. I look for the Hurricanes to be opening some eyes around mid part of the season.
Yeah, I think those are good points. With Ohio State, at least, I mean, yes, they went undefeated, but when you really look at some of those games, a lot of those were closer than they should be. Granted, and also some of them was against, lesser opponents. I haven't really come up with an underrated team, but as far as overrated, I'm going to go with Texas A&M. And, a lot of people are going to say, what, they have the Heisman Trophy winner, how could you say that? When you really look at this team, they only have one returning starter from the wide receiver position, and that defense is only returning 4 starters. So look at that team. It's almost a completely new team, and though Manziel is a great talent, we aren't certain that he's going to be able to play the whole year, as he's found himself in some trouble here. Speaking of the rankings, we're going to drop down. We've already talked about number 2 Ohio State. Let's drop down one ranking and talk about the currently number 3 ranked Oregon Ducks. Their first year without head coach Chip Kelly, as they started under a new regime. Ryan, what do you have on Oregon?
I think Oregon is going to transition great. They have D'Anthony Thomas. They have their quarterbacks returning. And Mark Helfrich was the offensive coordinator before. So I think they will be explosive on offense. They return all their secondary on defense. I know when you think Oregon, you don't think defense. But I believe they will be a pretty solid team. And at the end of the year, they'll be playing at least the BCS Bowl again.
Yeah, I think with Oregon, as you said, their head coach being their former offensive coordinator, there's not going to be much of a learning curve there. They're already going to have a lot set up. Here's a team that last year went 12-1, 5-1 against top 25 opponents, second in points in the nation with 49.6, and their defense only gave up a little over 21 points a game. Now, the interesting thing, like you said, about defense, luckily for now, they have a lot of the same returning starters. But you look at this team, whenever you get a new coach after someone like Chip Kelly, who was able to recruit very well, you don't always know how that coach is until they have to start recruiting. If you buy a farm, you cannot take credit for that first harvest, right? You have to own it for a little bit and see how you do planning and growing things. So I think he's got a year or two more of Chip Kelly type recruits, but to see how long he lasts once he's the guy bringing in recruits, I think is really going to make the difference.
Yeah, I think this year they'll still be good. I think they got enough senior leadership coming back, especially on the offensive side of the ball with running back quarterback. We all know how huge that is for Oregon. I mean, they like to run the option stuff, the quick handoffs, the fast pace. I believe they'll transition to that very nicely. But it should be interesting to see how Mark Helfrich, as the years go on, if he can keep Oregon, the big dogs out west. It's been USC for how many years until Oregon. So it should be very exciting to see if they can keep that consistency and be one of the top 3 to 5 teams in the nation year in and year out.
Yeah, Oregon, of course, undefeated last year up until their conference championship game where they were beat by Stanford, I believe, 17-13. It'll be interesting to see if it's another situation like that where this team looks like they're headed straight for a national championship and get tripped up. That's always kind of been Oregon's MO, is they find that one little roadblock that stops them. So we'll see if the Oregons are, with their speed, be able to run around that roadblock maybe this year. But really, it comes down to changing of the guard. It might be a little bit of a different culture there without Chip Kelly. Obviously, it's a very similar situation because the offensive coordinator, had been there from 2009, 2012, pretty much all of Chip Kelly's success there. But it might be a little different being, a changing of the guard situation. Speaking of changing of the guards, we're going to transfer now to Tallahassee down at Florida State, where a little changing of the guards happened, not in the coaching situation, but at the quarterback position. E.J. Manuel, of course, graduated, drafted by the Buffalo Bills, first quarterback taken. Interesting to see if he's going to start week 1. He seems to have an injury right now, but that's pro, and if you want to listen to that, listen to NFL Goal Line with Nick and Andrew, also on National Sports. Back to college, the new quarterback for Florida State, Jameis Winston. I hope I'm saying that right. It's been a little confusing how his name's pronounced, but we're going to go with Jameis Winston for the sake of this show. Officially named the starting quarterback, beating out sophomore Jacob Coker, and this was originally a 3-quarterback race as junior Clint Trickett transferred to West Virginia. And the interesting thing about this is, he had a couple of guys with a little bit more experience, and he decided to go with the freshman. Why do you think that is?
I think pure talent level, he's got a cannon. I mean, he plays baseball as well at Florida State. He's a 2-sport star. He's throwing people out going from first to third on base hits, and that's baseball. I think it's just the electrifyingness of Jameis Winston. He was number 1 quarterback in the nation 2 years ago, and Florida State was able to nab him. I think watching E.J. Manuel, yes, he was a little inconsistent, but they're a lot of the same style. Both big quarterbacks. He's got a great arm. I think Jimbo just feels like he's got the spark and the it factor. That's what I've heard out of the Tallahassee camp with Florida State. And I think everybody around Tallahassee is very excited to see. Clint Trickett I thought he was going to be the starter next year after EJ graduated, but after the spring game, Jameis and Jacob Coker looked very good. I think maybe he thought, go to West Virginia, try out there, but I think Jameis Winston, he's in Florida State's going to have to run the ball a little bit with him against Pittsburgh coming up on Monday because, his first time starting on the road, Labor Day night, Pittsburgh's going to be fired up, their first game in the ACC. But I think as the game goes on, we'll see some of the explosive plays, and I can't wait to get going with Jameis Winston down there in Tallahassee.
Yeah, it's not one of the situations that you normally see with Florida State. They've been, some people have even knocked them for starting off with extremely low levels of competition in years past. Maybe they finally listened to those people, and they're making it a little bit tougher to start the year. Obviously, every big school is going to have 1 or 2 cupcake games, but they're starting off with Pitt. That's a very solid season opener. And for your first start to be there, that could be very interesting. A little bit more take on this. We have David Hale, the ESPN reporter for the Florida State Seminoles, and here's what he had to say when that decision was made.
According to Jimbo, it came down to an issue of consistency, that day in and day out, that Jameis was the better guy. But I think that more than that, what comes into it is that Jameis just sort of has that it factor. It's something that Jimbo referred to earlier in the fall camp, and he's got that gregarious personality. He has a way of sort of galvanizing the team around him, and certainly the fan base has been happy to join into that chorus as well. He's just very outgoing. He's a funny kid, has a lot of confidence without necessarily seeming arrogant, and I think that's really brought the teammates around him, and it's really, I think, was what pushed him over the edge in this battle.
And Ryan touched on this briefly. We didn't exactly get to this point, but he was actually the number 1 ranked quarterback coming out of high school the year he was recruited, and one of his main reasons for going to FSU was for the part that Ryan touched on. He also plays baseball, and he's a darn good baseball player, and I think when you have a 2-sport athlete like that, it just shows the level of, the level of athleticism that, he possesses, and it's just one of those situations where when a guy has that much talent, sometimes you just got to go with him. And we have a call here. We're talking Florida State football, Jameis Winston being the starter. This is Richard Thayer, graduate of Florida State alumni. What do you have to say, Rich, about your school's new starting quarterback?
Hey guys, thanks for having me on the show. With Jameis Winston named as the starting QB at Florida State, there's a lot of speculation about how well he could possibly do. And a lot of people have started comparing him to Johnny Manziel, and Winston himself was quoted saying that if he ever gets Manziel syndrome, that someone should slap him in the face with a microphone. And honestly, that's a good point for him to make because he realizes that he's young, he's got to make all the right moves at the right time, he's got to be consistent, and the main thing to remember here is that he's young, he's got talent, he doesn't have a whole lot of experience yet, having just come out of camps and stuff like that, and being a freshman starter. But the talent is there, and if you look at the receiving core he's got out there, he's got Kenny Shaw and Rashad Green returning out there. They're both deadly. They're both quick, and a lot of the talent that is coming onto the field is also young, just like Jamius. So we'll see how he does with that level of talent.
Thanks, Richard, for the call. We really appreciate it. And, I think it does say a lot because Florida State, since the beginning of time, seemingly, they've been good at recruiting. So to say that you have a freshman that's worth starting over guys that you've recruited in the past really speaks volumes about his talent level. I think Richard made a good point about, he does have a lot of, veterans around him. Not as much as maybe years past, but at least in the receiver department, even the tight end department, Nick O'Leary's been there for a while. The running game should be just fine and able to assist him in that. But overall, here's a team, they might take a small step back from last year, but considering last year was an ACC championship and an Orange Bowl championship, a step back might not be heartbreaking, and I think we can still expect big things from Florida State this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Florida State, they're going to have talent. They're a little young defensively, but the talent coming in, Jimbo's very good at getting the backups in, especially in some of those blowout games that Florida State has. They have experience. And like you say, Nick O'Leary, he's going to have to be a safety valve for Jameis. When he gets in trouble, yeah, he's going to run, but see Nick O'Leary's always open 5 yards here, 5 yards there. He's going to have to be smart, take care of the ball. It's going to be exciting. Jameis Winston, I think, will be in there for 4 years, if considering you don't go pro or don't go to baseball. But he's got a lot of talent. I mean, he throws 94, 95 mile an hour from the pitching mound in baseball. So it goes to show you how good he can be. And Florida State does have a lot of receivers coming back. Offensive line's pretty experienced. Clemson obviously is the favorite. We'll touch on Clemson a little bit later in the ACC, especially in the Atlantic Division. Florida State has to go to Clemson this season. That's going to be a tough game, but it's like Phil said, a step back isn't terrible. I think 10 wins. It's not impossible to think about 9-10 win season and get the train rolling right and go on to future years with Winston under the helm.
I mean, this is really a team that would almost take no steps back, have not, Clemson be in that division, because they are, on all cylinders right now with experience and everything else. And even when they play, wouldn't be a blowout by any means. I mean, FSU would still have a puncher's chance to beat anybody with this freshman. But I mean, it's a lot of pressure on him, so it's interesting to see how he handles it. Richard compared him, pretty much as the opposite to Johnny Manziel, of being, a more mature guy, plays hard, works harder, type of kid. So really, it's just one of those things. It's really going to be how he does. There's even been people that have already compared him, at least mechanically, to Charlie Ward, and that that is a sacred name down in Tallahassee. So to even compare him to that already is big pressure. So it'll be interesting to see how he does there. Of course, they open up against Pittsburgh, who is having their first game in the ACC, which brings us to our next little small topic here, also with Syracuse joining the ACC, correct?
Yep, Syracuse.
Yes. So, really, both these teams joining, unfamiliar territory, playing teams that they wouldn't typically play otherwise. We don't really have a lot on these teams, but just, blindly, Ryan, what do you think, which team do you think would do better in the ACC for the first year, anyway?
That's hard to say. Pittsburgh and Syracuse, they're very similar. Syracuse is a hard little place to go and play at indoors. Syracuse is joining Atlantic. Pittsburgh's joining the Coastal. I think this year, probably I would say Pittsburgh might do a little bit better just because the Atlantic is a little bit more, has a couple heavyweights in it. You got Clemson, which a lot of people are thinking could go to the national championship. You got Florida State, who's going to be knocking on the door. Those two teams right there are juggernauts. The Coastal, you have Miami. They could be good. Looking at Syracuse, they have both sides of the ball. They turn about 6-6 on both sides of the ball. They could be pretty tough, but I think Pittsburgh probably will have a little bit better season just because the Coastal, I think, is a little bit weaker than the Atlantic right now.
Yeah, and you look at their schedule. Syracuse opens up with Penn State at a neutral site. At East Rutherford, New Jersey. They play a couple of teams out of conference that are a little difficult. Northwestern's a ranked team. They get a break against Wagner the week after that. But typically, they have a solid schedule top to bottom. So it will be interesting to see. Pittsburgh concerns me a little bit more. They did rebound last year and end up making a bowl game. They did lose to Ole Miss 38-17. But here's a team I'll never forget from last year that really blew me away. They lost their first game of the year last year to Youngstown State, Division II team, which is one that I tend to cheer for as far as Division II goes. So it's really one of those teams that I don't know what to expect. They do have a new quarterback at the helm at Tom Savage. He's a senior, but it's his first year starting there. So it'll be interesting to see how he does. I think overall Syracuse would do a little bit better in the first year. But now that they're both there, they're kind of starting at the same time. It might, adjust a new rivalry to, have two teams start at the same time in opposite divisions, see who can maybe build leeway a little bit closer.
Yeah, I see what you're saying about Syracuse doing a little better. I still think Pittsburgh just because of strength of schedule and conference. But both teams, I think, 8 wins could be good for both teams. Clemson has to go to Syracuse. If they can knock them off of Pittsburgh, could beat Florida State opening night. That could be big for them. They have opportunities to get into this conference and get their feet wet and be solid contenders. Like I said, Pittsburgh, first-time quarterback is a senior though, so he should know the offense pretty well.
He should have experience.
He should have experience, nothing else. So it'll be interesting to see how these teams in the ACC their first year. And I know there's some other conferences that have a lot of new faces. Of course, we have a lot of conference turnover, no longer Big East, and it should be interesting to see all these new conferences.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest one, of course, being, Big East being no more, turning into the AAC, which a lot of people are going to think is a typo of an ACC, which I wasn't thrilled on the name when it came out, of course, but, American Athletic Conference, that's what we're looking at these days, and, it really, people knock on them sometimes, being, the Big Least is the name that some people gave it, but they do have at least half the conference's solid teams. They have Houston, Connecticut, Cincinnati, the UCF Knights join there, Rutgers, and of course powerhouse Louisville, which has a chance as anybody if they run the table to make the national championship. So there's a lot of teams making a lot of moves. It'll be interesting to see how these teams settle in because sometimes teams just aren't good matchups, and when you go to a conference, they tend to have a certain style of play. You go to the SEC, you know what to expect. You go to the Big Ten, you know what they're about. With this new conference, it'll be interesting to see the type of style that it ends up coming up with here. Moving on towards more of this week's schedule, we're getting a little too far ahead with, predictions and whatever. We got 2 big games that we're really looking at here that we're really excited about. I touched a little bit on Georgia-Clemson last week, and we're going to get to that. But one that totally snuck up on me that I think more people need to be excited about is the Cowboys Classic between number 12 LSU and number 20 TCU. And like I said, this one snuck up on me, but now that I've really started to research it, I couldn't be more excited for this game.
I cannot wait to watch this game. It's kind of the closing game to a great Saturday of football, 9 o'clock. People, don't be surprised if TCU don't come in there and open up some eyes. LSU, they have Zach Mettenberg. He has to grow up more as a quarterback. And let's face it, LSU hasn't been the juggernaut offense recently. They put their hat on their defense. Well, if you look at LSU, they're only returning 3 stars on defense. So how much can they put on that LSU defense to kind of carry him? Once again, Zach Mettenberg, if he has to grow up as a quarterback at LSU to be more consistent, they got to find ways to score in Baton Rouge. That's just the bottom line. I think that's why Alabama has been able to beat them. Defensively, you can say, they're right there neck and neck, but Alabama just has a little bit more firepower year in and year out than LSU recently. And they're young on defense. If LSU thinks that they can go in this game against TCU, who's returning 9 starters on defense, so that's going to be hard for LSU to score on them. If they think they just come in there and they're SEC and be the big dogs of the game, I don't know. TCU's laying back, and they could sneak up on some people this year, especially defense. It should be a great game. I can't wait to watch it. Yeah, I mean LSU, of course, last year 10-3, ending with a Chick-fil-A Bowl, loss against Clemson in a thrilling game that ended 25-24. I think, like you said, all eyes are on Zach Mettenberger, the senior quarterback of LSU. Here's a guy, he really hasn't shown, what he needs to be the starter of an SEC juggernaut. This guy threw 12 touchdowns all last year. And offensively, that's not going to get it done. Here's a team that only had 30 offensive touchdowns all year. As you said, they hang their hat on their defense.
Not sure if they're going to be able to do that anymore. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, in that game. Like you said, TCU, the game is in Texas. It's not a home game, but it's a little bit closer to a home game, being the Cowboys Classic. I do think that's going to be a great game. Like you said, it's perfect way to end the night. 9 o'clock, last game of the night. You sit back, you enjoy it, and you just watch two ranked teams go at it. Earlier in the day, though, we're going to have the game that everybody's looking at, and this game, if the right things happen, this could have been, had they not been playing each other, a national championship preview if things went the right way. But instead, we're treated to it in week 1, where we have number 5 Georgia against number 8 Clemson. And there's so much to go about on this. Ryan, where do you want to start?
Oh, man, I cannot wait to tune into this game. ABC, Brett Musburger will be fired up. You are looking live. Can't wait to see that. When college football is back when you hear that. But first of all, it opens my eyes in this game. The 2 quarterbacks. 2 Heisman Trophy candidates in Taj Boyd and Aaron Murray. Both looking and poised to lead their teams to national championships. Well, week 1, it's a big step to that. I know that both teams have some hurdles down the road. Of course, Georgia and SEC, Clemson has some tough games down the road. But this one right here could give one of these teams, whoever the winner of this game, has the foot in the door, so to speak, to go to the national title game. I cannot wait to see the quarterback battle. I personally think Taj Boyd could be a little bit better, just the fact that they're at home. In Death Valley, I know LSU's Death Valley, but Clemson's not nothing to laugh at either. That place is loud. Their fans are going to be fired up. They've been waiting to get to this level for a while now. And Georgia concerns me a little bit on defense. They're very young defensively, and Clemson has firepower up and down the board, up and down the offense. They can run the ball, they can throw the ball, they get you off balance. If you're not a disciplined defense, especially on the road, that he could burn you. I mean, Clemson has speed galore. Aaron Murray will be good. There's no doubt about it. But Taj Boyd he's gonna open a lot of people's eyes, and Clemson I'd have winning a close one, just the fact that they're at home and Georgia's defense is a little bit inconsistent, but it should be a great game. It could go either way. I just have Clemson snubbing out a couple points, field goal here and there, maybe that.
Yeah, I think Clemson, it'd be a little disrespectful to give them more than, say, 10 points. I think any more than that is just unrealistic. And you look at, you think of Clemson, you think of that offensive firepower. Georgia only returns 3 starters on defense, so that could really hurt them there. But the thing you also got to remember about Georgia, they lost 2 games last year. Game to South Carolina, game to Alabama. And people got to remember, because people are ready to just give Alabama another championship. Slow down. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying it won't happen, but slow down. This is a team that was up 21-10 on Alabama in the SEC championship game. ESPN yesterday reran that. They tend to re-air bowl games, in the weeks leading up, kind of get you hyped. I watched that entire game, and I didn't realize 3.5 quarters, Georgia outplayed Alabama.
Yep, they did.
Alabama found a way to win, but Georgia, I think, deserves a little bit more respect. And even with everything that happened when they, rallied back, they were 3 yards away from the end zone to win the game on the last play. So it's really one of those things. I think Georgia is out to get a little bit more respect that they're not given, for how that went with them. But I think both these guys, Aaron Murray, I kind of agree with you. Taj Boyd will probably have a little bit better of a game than Aaron Murray. But I think both these guys are, probably in the top 10 listings of Heisman, in the preseason. I think either of these guys come out and win it. They both know how to put up points. Looking at Clemson, they return. What are we looking at here? They have 4 returning starters. So, both these teams have a lot to fill in from last year, having, good years. Clemson, starting a new running back, Rod McDowell. He's a senior, but he's first time starting, of course. Sammy Watkins is there, so you're going to have a chance to put up points. Clemson tripped up a little bit at the end of the year. Also, both these teams lost to South Carolina, and that's really nothing, that you can bat your eyes about. Again, this team only lost 2 games, Florida State and South Carolina. Can't really say much about that. And for Clemson to come in and beat LSU in a bowl game situation as of last year, I think it really speaks volumes that, teams in other conferences can challenge the bully that's been the SEC lately. I think the gap is still there, but I feel the gap is closing.
I do feel the gap is closing, especially next year, too. You got Alabama, they're sitting up there. They're the big dogs. They're going to be losing. They're having a new quarterback next year. And there's going to be teams. I still think Oregon, we touched on this earlier. I still think Oregon's going to be right there. Clemson has a train rolling. Dabo Sweeney is recruiting with the best. He's coming to Florida. He's getting talent that the Seminoles, the Gators, the Hurricanes would normally get. He's competing with Alabama coaching. Clemson's this isn't just a 1-year wonder here. I believe they're gonna be good. There's other teams out there. I think USC is gonna start getting a train rolling again. The SEC dominance, yeah, you got to hang their hat to them. You can't debate it. They got the defense is really what separates them. But I do see teams that are starting to close the gap. And I wouldn't be surprised this year to see a non-SEC team go. We got Texas in the Big 12 that's starting to get ahead of steam rolling. A lot of people think that they have high expectations for this season. So it'll be interesting to see, especially this week 1, if the ACC can kind of be the conference to step up to the SEC. I know we got North Carolina, South Carolina Thursday night. We have Virginia Tech, Alabama. We'll see if Beamer can get his boys ready to roll. Clemson, Georgia, of course, the big one. There's some interesting games to see if there is some other teams of different conferences closing the gap on the SEC.
I agree with most of that. The gap has got to be closing. And, you look at some of these teams, the SEC, and not even just the SEC, but the Alabama dominance. I don't know how much longer it can last. I mean, I think they're always going to be a solid team, but you look at, they looked human at times last year, which is something we have not seen from them in, a year or so. But you look at just the rankings, and, a conference that I think, talk about stepping up, ACC I think is doing their part. A conference that I feel isn't, that really needs to, because they have in years past, is the Big Ten. They have a lot of teams, in the top 25. They'll have your Michigan, you'll have Nebraska. Michigan State is they're not in at the moment, but they're no stranger to being ranked. Ohio State, of course, they're up there. They're number 2. We've touched about how we think they shouldn't be that high. But after Ohio State, there is a huge drop-off in the Big Ten. And teams like Nebraska, Wisconsin, you need them to step up. Unless you're an SEC fan, you don't want to see it dominated by Bama or SEC. There's plenty of other good SEC teams like South Carolina, with Nick Saban has even said, Davion Clowney, he has called him, and this might be a little too much, but if Nick Saban says it, most people are going to believe you. He called Davion Clowney the best football player on the planet. Not in the country. Not in the country. So it's really just one of those things where it comes down to the gap is starting to close. It's not at the point where everyone's equal. But I think that's what people like about college football is there's just so many teams, and there's always going to be your hierarchy, but you're going to want things closer. You're going to want things more competitive. You're going to want that any given Sunday type of feeling.
Yeah, and touching on your Big Ten point and that they need to step up, they've had their chances. Last year, I think about it. Georgia played Nebraska. Nebraska played with them for a while. They got, they count short. And, of course, we all remember the Michigan-South Carolina game where the Clowney, pretty much rocked the earth on that hit. Mm-hmm. We've seen it.
The hit around the world.
How many times we've seen it? And I can't get enough of watching it. But the Big Ten is going to have to step up. Like I said, Ohio State's going to have to prove to me that they're really where they belong. And getting out of the Big Ten, you go out west. And I think the Pac-12, I think that conference is maybe closing the gap closer than anybody. You got Oregon who's going to be there. USC's starting to get their stuff together with Lane Kiffin getting recruits in. And there's a team that everybody sleeps on. The Stanford Cardinal. A lot of people thought, Andrew Luck, they were going to fall off. But as we proved last year with a Rose Bowl victory over Wisconsin, Stanford's nothing to sleep on either. So they're a physical team. You go to the Big 12 and also in the Pac-12 at UCLA as well. Going to the Big 12, you got Texas, which I think is going to be better. The Bob Stoops regime in Oklahoma, they're starting to slip a little bit.
Yeah.
They're going to have to pick up their game a little bit too. Kansas State, we'll see how they do this year under Coach Snyder. It should be interesting, but like I said, there's other great teams other than just the prototypical SEC. I think the Pac-12 and the ACC are the two leaders coming up. We'll see what the Big 12 does with Ohio State. And we should start seeing a little bit more parity in college football. It's a great sport, but I think people are ready to see other teams, different brand of football on the big stage, more high offensive power teams taking control. Great, the SEC has the dominance, but I think teams are starting to close the gap.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on this slightly, and I think it's a good thing to bring up here as we're about 30 minutes into our show here now. Oklahoma, they did finish 10-3 last year, but here's a team that, to me, I feel has had a sense of entitlement in the past couple of years that if they show up with the OU on their helmet, they're going to win.
Mm-hmm.
And they're that bully that if you stand up to them, they sometimes back down. That's what I've gotten from them. And of course, they have a new quarterback going in. Blake Bell is a new starting quarterback. He's a junior there. They have They have two returning star wide receivers, running back, fullback, and most of the offensive line is coming back. So you're getting, aside from the quarterback, generally the same team. But defense, it's a whole new bunch. They have only 3 returning starters, a linebacker, a corner, and a safety, and a returning kicker. So Oklahoma, we'll really see. This is, at least on defense, is a slightly new team. So we'll see if they're able to maybe turn that tide, because that's a team that typically is in the top 5. Here they're sitting at 15.
Yeah, it should be interesting. Oklahoma, that's been their problem, is their defense. Their offense puts up points with the best. Landry Jones was putting up big numbers. Of course, he's gone now, but I don't know. Oklahoma is one of those teams you just can't figure out. You'll watch them one week against the Juggernaut, and they put 80 up, and they're the best team in the nation. And then they'll come out and against somebody that's inferior and just not show up. I don't know if Bob Stoops isn't getting his boys ready. A lot of people are thinking he's on the hot seat if he don't return Boomer Sooner to the promised land again. It's been a while since we've seen Oklahoma talked about as one of the best teams in the nation. Part of it has to do with a lot of the SEC, taking recruits, you can go on and on about it. But I think Bob Stoops, if you don't start getting it turned around, Oklahoma's just not going to sit on a team ranked preseason 16. That's just not OU football. They like to be in the spotlight, looking to win titles. Big 12 championships are good, but it's just not enough for the Sooners. They need to be, in their eyes, ranked number 1 in the nation, contending for national titles. And we'll see if they keep bringing the athletes to Oklahoma. They have to do something soon, or else they're kind of just being a forgotten team out there in the Big 12. And, of course, you got Texas coming back up again this year, too, with Ash. He's an experienced quarterback. Mm-hmm. They had a huge win over Oregon State last year in the bowl game. They got a train coming, too. We'll see if Mac Brown can get the horns back to what they were with Colt McCoy. In Oklahoma, they're going to have to step their game up, or else they're going to get left in the dust a little bit.
And, of course, a Cotton Bowl loss to Texas A&M last year does not help matters. A quote by Mike Stoops was given about his, pretty much all-new defense, and he said simply, they said they wanted a challenge, well, they're going to get it. So I feel that he has, these are guys that he brings in. So if you bring them in, you feel that they're Oklahoma-worthy. So it's good that he backs his younger players like that. Obviously, he didn't, praise them, off the roof or anything, but it's a team where he feels confident, and I guess we're going to really have to see as they open up. They have a fairly easier schedule to start the year anyway, against University of Lafayette. They play West Virginia, Tulsa. They do have to play Notre Dame. They play Texas, TCU, Texas Tech, of course, all those Big 12 teams. Here's a team, last year they got upset. They got beat by Notre Dame pretty bad, and they tripped up early in the year against Kansas State, and then, of course, to Texas A&M. So it seems to me as they can beat the bad teams, they can beat the decent teams, but the difference between good and great, Oklahoma is the dividing line, and I think they're good, but they're not great, and it might take a while to get there.
It seems when teams come out and punch them in the mouth and have the same amount of talent level, and Oklahoma just can't out-talent you, it just seems that they just don't step up to the challenge. Texas A&M last year in the bowl and just punched them right in the mouth, and Oklahoma just looked disinterested, like they didn't want to be there. And we'll see what happens. Come on, another point I was just thinking about, we don't see this year a lot of is the BCS busters, like the Boise States and those teams.
Yeah, the last 2 years have been pretty predictable, towards the top anyway.
I think those teams might be fizzling out a little bit, but I think the major conferences are putting their dominance on it again, and it should be interesting to see if there's a conference out there that can derail the SEC this year.
Yeah, as we said, I think the gap's closing, but the gap is still very much alive. And you look at, these teams that are trying to do it, they can't do it alone. It has to be kind of like a group effort, because to be a good conference, you can't have 2 good teams. You have to be, your good teams have to be great, your middle teams have to be good, and your bad teams have to be decent. Like, you can't have, like you look at SEC, and they got those teams like Kentucky. When Kentucky plays middle-of-the-pack schools at other teams, they tend to make a pretty good, depart of themselves. So I think it's got to be a group effort, really, for much of that to happen. Well, guys, this has been a great time on college football across the nation. We cannot wait to actually give you some game insight, as, of course, tomorrow college football officially kicks off, and I know that we can't wait. So thank you guys for tuning in to us this week, and we'll catch you next week. Thanks for listening.